to adjudicate every time somebody goes like this. And tech is, the tech is there to facilitate it. So now it's just getting hearts and minds, right?
It is, and I see, I'm hoping that there will be a shift in mindset and thinking in healthcare, where we are encouraging more innovation. I want to say we take a little more risk. In the healthcare space, obviously there's lives at stake, but in the revenue cycle, we've got a lot of a playing ground that we could play in and take a lot more risk, and we just don't.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful that leaders will kind of lean into that. I was on a panel this summer at A&I, and we were talking about the work from home and coming back to the office. And one of the comments that we talked about was, there was a time when we were afraid to send people to a work from home environment in the revenue cycle.
Yeah, not that long ago.
Not that long ago.
Right?
And then, of course, we all had to send everybody home, and we figured it out.
Yeah.
And I just wish that we could take that mindset and push forward through that fear. What else are we afraid to do?
Yep.
And look back on that situation and say, you know what? A lot of organizations had a lot of really smart people that came together and solved the problem very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Why can't we do that in other places?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm hopeful that we can build on that momentum.
I mean, my favorite story of that is relatable in the sense of telemedicine. And I was sitting on a CEO panel, and this topic of why were we going to take 5 to 10 years to do this incrementally and go on a journey? And then we did it in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and it's like, well, because that's what we do.
That's right.
It's almost that simple.
It is.
Right?
It is.
But it shows you, to your point, that you can be decisive and you can make investment. That's the thing, too, about administrative waste, is I talk about it from the lens of, so there's $1 trillion of clinical and financial and administrative waste. The report from HFMA a couple years ago was what, 270 billion of RCM waste.
Right.
Duplication, redundancy, inefficiency. Well, that's a lot to work with. That's almost like a fund if you think about it. You gotta rethink it. You have to use those dollars, and that's what we're trying to do. As we push clients, is like, it's this idea, and I know we've talked about it. One smart bot can pay for 5 bots.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
That's right.
And then one of those bots can pay for 3 bots.
Right.
So I think that's the way that innovation has to have an ROI. There's some upfront investment that people need to make. One of the guests yesterday had, or maybe the first day, I love the idea of spiral up. You can't be afraid to innovate and invest just because the market's tough right now. Like, you got to spiral up. And I promised him I was going to steal that.
That's a good one.
Because I just love the way it changes the thinking, right? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think we have to be smart about it.
Yep.
But, kind of using the COVID work from home example, everyone came to the table and they all laid their personal opinions, their personal philosophies. They left them at the door because there was a greater good that had to be established.
Yep.
And so when you think about the outcome, if we could all focus on what outcome are we trying to achieve versus I want to protect my ideas, my thoughts, my department, the things, my babies, right?
Yep.
If we could all do that, I mean, I think that leveling up or spiraling up that you described would be so much easier, because we would be less emotionally attached to the process and more focused on the outcome. And then, okay, is this outcome, did we get what we wanted? Great, let's do more. Did we not? Okay, let's figure out why and go forward again.
Yep.
But I see that, I hope to see that more and more in healthcare, but I do think we've been lacking those types of innovation sessions in the revenue cycle.
I know we've had these discussions because we're both passionate about people and culture, right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, because in this topic of innovation, it's easy to your point, talk about the tech and the bits and the bytes, and that's always secondary. It's more cultural.
It
right?
is.
Like, I'm passionate about change management. Like, before we talk about any of the tech, what's our change management, right? Change is hard.
Change is
Adoption
hard.
and utilization. And I know you come at it through a similar lens, but like the people side of innovation, what's your thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think So I always revert back to one of my fundamental reading material books that I read years and years ago, The 7 Habits
Yep.
with Stephen Covey. And the
Yep.
fifth habit is seek first to understand and then to be understood.
Yep.
And I think that in order to create that culture, you have to kind of figure out why people are resistant to it, right?
Yeah.
What are they afraid of? And then meet them where they are and help them move along. So are they afraid that they're gonna, that their job is at risk, right?
Yeah.
How can you reassure that? Are they afraid of failing, right?
Yep.
So how can you create an environment where people are more afraid of not trying,
Yeah, sure.
or feel more pressure to try than to fail? And so I believe strongly that in order to do that, though, you have to kind of meet people where they are,
Yeah.
figure out how do they see that situation
Sure. Through their lens.
through
yeah.
their lens.
Yeah.
Because honestly, everyone has knowledge and experience to share, and the best outcomes come from that collaborative approach. You see the world differently than I see it.
Yep.
In a lot of ways.
Yep.
And when we have these rich dialogues, it's because you bring your experience, I bring
Yeah.
mine, and we design something better
Sure.
from both of our experiences. So
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
that's my guidance to revenue cycle leaders, is really meet people where they are. And I
Yeah.
would also say, sometimes revenue cycle leaders grew up through coding or billing in the world where there was a black and white.
Yeah.
This is the right code, that's
Yeah.
the right claim.
Yeah.
And revenue cycle end to end really doesn't operate like that.
Yeah.
So helping people think beyond the very black and white, the very absolute, and the more of the art of the possible.
Yeah.
I think would really help create that culture of innovation.
Yeah. I totally agree. At the same time, I also sometimes let's take something like bots and the idea that bots can, impact FTEs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there is a reality to that. So it's also important to be straight up about that with
Yeah.
people. But give them a timeline and give them an opportunity, right, to enter the new world.
That's right.
Like one of my passions is the idea of creating true portfolio and knowledge workers, and I know we've chatted
Yeah.
about that, right?
Yeah.
Billers and collectors and analysts and traditional conventional RCM folks, they deserve a shot to be upskilled,
That's right.
right? So you got to have the right timeline and give them, at the same time, they got to be honest with themselves, right? Like that, what you're doing right now, that could go way through robotics, automation, right? But do you want to become a knowledge worker?
Right.
Right? Give them an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I see that. I have seen that so many times through the course of my career. As you know, I've done so many Epic conversions.
Yeah.
And when an organization converts from a legacy system onto Epic, Epic is they're a very different beast.
Sure.
Has some great tools and technology, but it requires the end user to really rethink their work.
Yeah.
And a lot of organizations struggle because they want to make the technology fit the process that they've always done, because that the person sitting in the seat, this is how I've been successful my whole career
Yeah.
at whatever provider. So, kind of getting ahead of that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, some people don't want to be skilled up, and you
Yeah.
have to accept that as a reality. But approaching it in a non-threatening way and more about I'm investing in you,
Yeah.
I think is so key to staying fresh and staying on top of all the changes in healthcare, because they come so fast.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I wonder too why, whenever you're sitting down talking about something like change management and the difference it makes, there's never pushback, right? People go, yeah, totally. Including the ones that don't have the budget for it.
Right.
So sometimes we're sharing examples of like a complex implementation that goes well because the client has a change management discipline. So they have change managers and PMOs. But from where I sit, that's unique, right? The ones that truly invest in that and understand that. So, but it's so logical. It's like you can't paint a house until you do the sanding and scraping, right? It's that. Why do you think it's so hard? Why do RCM departments and hospitals not invest more in these things that we know work?
Gosh,
Why is it such a struggle?
That's a great question. I don't know. I was having a conversation recently about, I'm going to go back to the Bain class report, right? So revenue cycle is on the top of everyone's mind.
Yep.
And the data supports that. well, hasn't revenue cycle been on the top of everyone's mind for the last 10 years?
Oh, yeah.
Why are we struggling? And it's a great question. And, I think there's a lot of contributing factors, but there seems to be a cultural, just fundamental mindset that we're hanging on to.
Yeah.
And I think, I also had this conversation with someone recently about just the technology, right? So now technology is so much more prevalent in the revenue cycle.
Yep.
I mean, I'll date myself and say when I started in the revenue cycle, you put charges on the bill went out the door, and you got paid a percent of charges.
Yeah.
And that was it.
UB82, right? UB82, come on.
My charge master was in this big binder, you know what I mean? I would look up charges. Anyway,
We used to talk about red ink on your hands on a UB92. But remember, the UB82 was green ink.
Yes, it was green ink,
You were working those things.
Yeah.
Why are my hands green?
And the printers were those big green and white bar paper. Anyway, we're definitely dating ourselves.
Yes.
But where I was going with this is that, I think that as people have evolved over time, technology is such a component of revenue cycle, and I think that we've left a lot of the people behind because they don't invest the time in learning the technology. They don't understand the guts of the system that they're working with. I see that as a gap. So I would encourage revenue cycle leaders to really understand how the software that they have, whether it is their EMR or a bolt-on or whatever, because if you don't understand how it works, you can't re-engineer it. And you need to constantly be re-engineering it.
Yeah, people and process, you got to crush that before you do the tech stuff.
Right.
And I'm supposedly a tech guy, right? A software guy and all that, but no, that.
But tech is an enabler.
You learn that stuff. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's secondary.
That's right.
What are we trying to achieve? You still need people to do it.
Yeah.
And change is, you can say things like change is the only constant. We all love aphorisms like that, but sure, it's the only constant, but it's also hard.
It is hard.
Right? And
It is hard.
You got it, changing hearts and minds, especially for the kind of tectonic shifts that the industry needs. That's what I struggle with is it's all there for the taking in terms of could we tackle administrative waste in a big way? Yeah. I mean, every day there's so much opportunity, but the hearts and minds part is first.
Do you think, let me ask you a question from your seat.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is more acceptance or more resistance to what the data tells us about waste in healthcare?
It's a great question. I would say it's a classic, it depends, on the situation, the audience, the corporate politics, But I'll be the optimist and go more acceptance because I think, take AI and machine learning and things I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, prospective clients would come up to us and say, what do you guys do in AI? Because I know I need to do it. I don't totally know where or how, but my peers are doing it. Now, there's also, let's be honest, without naming names, buzzwords sometimes are tricky because they create collateral damage, confusion. But when you say, okay, but AI and machine learning, it's still just software.
That's right.
You're automating human tasks and duplicate tasks, and so I think there have been enough use cases now where I think people see that can be done. And people are building internal departments, they're building their own muscle. I always advocate it's a partnership model because we could talk about economies of scale, but it's also that economies of intellect. We learn so much from it was in a book.
I'm stealing that.
Economies of intellect, right? That's what that's one of my passions now is the community effect. So crowdsourcing the data so we can all learn from it. And as you know, I'm a big open data liquidity, no proprietary models, make healthcare better. So if you've got all of that, then people see the use cases and then sharing the human best practices hey, here's how I implement. My favorite thing to do is step back and let clients talk about what they got done with data or what they got done with a bot or. So to me, it's still in the nascent early phase, early adopters. There's enough of them that it's exciting.
Yeah.
I wish it was more.
Well, and yeah, kind of the genesis of my question is over the course of my career, it seems like when there's this adoption curve where when you start to really show people the data and the data that VisiQuate can show, the volume and the depth of data, there's a natural resistance to it where people want to kind of argue with what the data is telling them.
Yeah.
And you have to accept, and it may not be perfect, but it's probably directionally correct, right? It's enough to be like, okay, spur some action. And I was just curious if you're seeing that people are more accepting of the story that the data is telling and then taking action on it versus kind of arguing about the data itself.
Yeah. So through that lens, I think it's it's always the presentation layer and how you set the table for things like that. So the way that we try to really set the table is say, the reason that you buy something that, let's just say that it's like the metaphor I use often for night vision goggles and infrared. So if you're wearing your sunglasses at night in the data battle every day between, let's just say, payer and provider, you need infrared and night vision goggles, right?
Right.
Been using that for years. Well, the whole point of it is to see things that you don't see when you're wearing sunglasses at night.
Right.
And you're not doing that intentionally.
Right.
You just don't have that tech that allows you. So it's the mindset, and it's always make the client the hero.
Absolutely.
We're selling you the gear.
Right.
The Batman belt, but we want you to be the hero to crush value. And we're passionate about upskilling people.
Right.
So I think if it's presented that way, it makes a big difference than like the Hawthorne effect, like Big Brother, that doesn't work. It's not the right way to go about it.
Yeah.
I say it's like when work for home happened, COVID, my advice was don't spyware people.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Gamify them.
Right. Right.
Who cares if they work 8 hours or 6 hours if they crush the results in 6 hours because they're a single mom with 3 kids?
Right.
You should reward that.
Right.
Right?
Right. And their lives were so disrupted. Right. Anyway, we could talk about that all day long.
Yeah.
So I want to circle back to something that you said about why is change management so hard in revenue cycle, because I have a follow-up answer to that. And the other thing that I see is there is a lot of deep subject matter expertise in the functional areas of revenue cycle, but revenue cycle is a cycle.
Yeah.
And the softwares and the technology that we use, there's a before and an after of whatever it is that you're working on.
Yeah.
And I think that the organizations that have a very strong understanding of the whole cycle and how it splinters off, right? Revenue cycle impacts supply chain chain impacts revenue cycle, right? All those
Absolutely.
things. Those organizations, I think, are going to be poised for better innovation because the people coming to the table to innovate are going to have a better frame of mind for, if I do this, I'm going to make a mess over here.
Absolutely.
And I think that we're getting there, but we need to get there faster.
Well, you're speaking my love language because that's when I talk about pre-service to zero balance in a longitudinal, like everything, seeing that data so that you can learn from it. You got to solve the transaction in front of you, get paid from the payer, but then from a regression analysis and studying what works and what doesn't work, because you're exactly right. It's a continuum. I even say, I wish we called it more of a continuum because I think a cycle sometimes implies step 1, step 2, step 3, where there's always these, wait a minute. You may be ready to drop a bill and you figure out that there's missing charges. So you got to go back and fix that so you can get it out the door. But is that systemic? So it's the classic when we all talk about going upstream. If you have good longitudinal data, and that's not easy to get, it's limitless where you can drive improvement.
And I think you have to get everyone aligned around the goal. So I'll tell a story. I had a conversation with someone one time, and it was one of those moments. It's a big aha moment for me because I'm still talking about it years later. But I was trying to implement, add on like D&Bs in Epic, right, to hold a bill for whatever, to make sure that when it went out the door, it went out the door correctly and it got paid.
Sure.
And the person that I was trying to influence said to me, but then I'm going to be in trouble because my D&B is going to be higher. And I'm like, but if it goes out the door and gets a denial, then we don't get paid. And there's all this rework that happens. But that individual was so focused on their specific goal and their measurement that they couldn't see past that to innovate. Do you know what I mean?
Forest and trees.
Absolutely. And so I think that that's probably still prevalent, and we need to push past that and get everybody aligned kind of on the same goals.
I almost named an app one time, Forest and Trees, just to drive the point home that you got to zoom out.
Yeah.
It's important to zoom out. You got or Periscope. Sometimes you got to go deep.
Yeah.
But then you got to zoom out to see what you're really solving.
Absolutely.
And solving it at scale.
Absolutely.
So in the wind down, because we could talk forever.
We could. We could.
What if you think out, from your seat, and you're seeing a lot of use cases, talking to a lot of people. Where do you think, if you had to place a bet, where will we be in 3 years?
Oh, that's a terrible question. Where will we be in 3 years?
You can just pick a couple of themes.
I'm going to answer where I hope we are in 3 years. How about that?
Yeah.
I hope that we are having more intellectual and collaborative conversations between payers and providers.
Yep.
I hope that we are continuing to educate patients on and their caregivers on the revenue cycle as a whole, and that people understand, patient estimates, as an example, are there to educate a patient.
Sure.
I hope that we continue down that path, and that the John Q. Public has a better understanding of health insurance benefits, their out-of-pocket expense, all of those things, so that we are a more intelligent community of revenue side or of healthcare consumers.
Yeah, sure.
And I hope that we continue to really have dialogue around how do we reduce waste. And some of that is in payers and providers. I think there's a lot there to unpack. I hope we're brave. I hope we're brave in our 20 square feet. How can we reduce waste and make the healthcare world a better place for our patients, for our community, and for the people in the business? I mean, we should care more for each other. So that's my aspiration.
Well said. But if I pin you down, so let's call that euphoria and a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. So if I say in 3 years, where would you put the number, knowing that change is hard and pragmatism, like how much progress can we make?
I mean, optimistically, I'm going to say like a 3. We're slow. We're just slow. And it's for somebody with my personality, and I think you have a similar personality. It's frustrating, right? Like I'm like, let's do it. Let's do it already. But I think, again, I've been in the revenue cycle a long time, as have you, and we are just slow to adopt change. I hope that we get faster. But I don't see that we will currently.
I know.
I hate to say that.
It takes crazy people like us pushing and cajoling and evangelizing, and there are a lot of them in the industry now that are like, just the topic of innovation is getting more airtime now than it has in a long time, and I think that's a good thing overall.
And I would say, you said evangelizing, and I would also use the word inspiring. People like us need to inspire people.
That's right.
For changes in behavior and changes in the way that they think, and they come to work every day to solve revenue cycle problems.
It's contagious. Maybe we can end on the community effect, right? So the community effect of bringing people together and solving a problem. Like I love some of the stories about folks that solved price transparency, and did it well, because that's not easy, right? The legislation comes out, you look at it, you say, not always easy to operationalize, but there are those moments where people get it done. So it's like, well, they got it done, right?
How can we learn from that and share knowledge?
Share knowledge.
That's right.
Ideal liquidity.
That's right.
That's what we need more of.
That's right. Economies of intellect.
Economies of intellect.
I'm using that.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I stole upscale. So, or no, up spiral.
Up spiral.
Up spiral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Well, thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming.
This was great. Always a pleasure.
Let's keep doing it.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.